Welcome back to The Explainer. So, today we are unpacking a seriously fascinating academic framework, the evolution of realist political theory. If you've ever watched the news and just wondered what's actually driving those massive world-altering decisions made by global superpowers, well, you're definitely in the right place. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this by starting with the ultimate question. It's literally the single puzzle that international relations scholars have been trying to crack for decades. What is the root cause of state behavior, right? Why do nations act the way they do on the global stage? I mean, when a country suddenly decides to expand its borders or build up its military or forge some surprise alliance, what is the fundamental driver behind that choice? Is it human psychology? Is it global mathematics? Well, the answer entirely depends on which lens you choose to look through. Here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll start with a quick intro to realist political theory, then look at classical realism and the human ego. From there, we'll shift to neorealism and the systemic box, followed by neoclassical realism and complex actors. And finally, we'll wrap up by comparing this whole evolution side by side. All right, section 1, the realist political theory, a brief introduction. Moving right in to section 2, classical realism and the human ego. To really wrap our heads around classical realism, we have to look at this crucial Latin term, animus dominandi. This essentially translates to flawed human nature and personal ego driving the pursuit of power. So classical realism basically views the state as nothing more than a collection of flawed human egos seeking raw power. The theory argues that, hey, because human beings are naturally driven by this desire to dominate, the states they run are inevitably going to reflect that exact same aggressive, power-seeking human nature. To ground this in some history, our source material points straight to Hitler's aggressive expansionism that caused World War II as a major real-world application of this theory. Classical realists look at this era as the ultimate expression of the human ego driving state action. To them, the root cause of the conflict wasn't just, a matter of global economics or abstract systemic structures. It was really about the flawed, power-hungry nature of an individual leader manifesting on a massive, devastating scale. It's literally animus dominandi in action. Which brings us to section 3, Neorealism, also known as the systemic box. Now, we're zooming out here. Notice the massive shift in how scholars began analyzing the world. We're comparing the classical focus, which, as we just saw, zeroes in on individual human flaws, against the neorealist focus, which is purely systemic. Neorealists basically argue, actually, scratch that. They firmly insist that if you want to understand state behavior, you completely ignore the personalities of the leaders. Instead, you have to look at the invisible, overarching structure of the global system itself. Under neorealism, the root causes of state behavior are international anarchy and the structural distribution of power. Now, by international anarchy, the theory doesn't mean total chaos in the streets. It simply means there's no supreme global authority. There's no world police to call if a country gets attacked, right? Because of this anarchy, survival is the absolute only goal, and how a state ensures its survival is entirely dictated by the structural distribution of power. Essentially, who has the big militaries, who holds the resources, and where exactly does a state sit in that global hierarchy? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the neo-realist view of the state itself. They see the state as merely a black box, responding rationally to those exact structural forces we just talked about. In this view, personal ego completely removed from the equation. It honestly doesn't matter if the leader is inherently good, bad, greedy, or peaceful. The state is just a rational unit, a black box, calculating the odds of its survival based purely on the external pressures of international anarchy and power distribution. The source material actually uses the Cold War arms race as the perfect real-world application for neorealism. It illustrates what scholars call the structural security dilemma. Think about it. During the Cold War, you had two massive powers. Because of international anarchy, neither side could entirely trust the other. So one side rationally builds up its arms just for defense, but the other side sees that buildup, feels threatened, and of course, builds up their own arms in response. This systemic anarchy led directly to the structural security dilemma of the Cold War. It's a spiral of escalation driven entirely by the structure of the system, not necessarily by the individual animus dominandi of the leaders. All right, zooming in a bit again. Section 4, Neoclassical Realism and Complex Actors. Under Neoclassical Realism, the level of analysis actually merges the systemic structure with the state and individual levels. So the state is no longer just a simple rational black box. Instead, it's viewed as a complex actor. The theory argues that, yes, sure, systemic pressures definitely exist, but key internal factors, specifically leadership perceptions and domestic politics, come right back into play to shape how a state ultimately behaves. It's a bit of a hybrid, really. Let's walk through this structured cause and effect chain to see exactly how neoclassical realism bridges that gap. Step 1. Systemic pressures push on a country from the outside. We're talking things like shifting global power. But then, step 2, those pressures are filtered through domestic constraints. So the pressure hits the state, but then domestic politics, budget fights, and leadership perceptions get involved. And finally, step 3, this whole filtering process leads to altered responses. The country's final action isn't just a math equation, it's a messy mix of external pressure and internal reality. The real-world application here perfectly grounds this hybrid theory. Imagine a state facing a clear systemic threat from a rising rival. A pure neorealist would say, yep, the state will immediately build a bigger army to counter it. But neoclassical realism points out that domestic public opinions, or institutional pressures, might actually delay or fundamentally alter that country's security response. If the citizens flat out refuse to pay higher taxes for the military, or if competing political parties just can't agree on a budget, well, the state's response to that external systemic threat is totally changed. Let's move to Section 5 and see how this all builds. The evolution compared, bringing it all together. Taking a look at this table, notice how their root cause evolves from flawed human nature over to international anarchy, and finally settles on systemic pressures filtered domestically. You can see our level of analysis shifting from the individual, zooming way out to the systemic, and then landing on a complex blend of both. And our real-world applications track this perfectly too, from Hitler's expansionism to the Cold War arms race, all the way to the nuanced delays in modern security responses. It all connects like one giant puzzle. So what does this all mean for us today? Well, you now have 3 distinct, incredibly powerful academic lenses to view the world through. Look at the news today. Look at the rising tensions and global maneuvers happening right this second. How might these varying levels of analysis explain the next major shift in state behavior? Are we watching flawed individual egos clashing? Are we witnessing the inevitable rational result of systemic anarchy? Or are we seeing complex actors struggling with their own domestic constraints? Keep these frameworks in your back pocket as you watch the world unfold. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.